Both with anecdotal evidence and with international research, we are finding cannabis to be incredibly effective for migraines. I see a great deal of patients who experience both chronic migraines and menstrually related migraines who find cannabis to be significantly beneficial to their concerns. In a recent study regarding cluster headaches and chronic migraines, patients who consume cannabis showed a 50% reduction in their pain, as well as a near 50% reduction in the frequency of their headaches and migraines. There's a number of approaches when trying to address migraines. I think for patients who are maybe reticent to engage with cannabis, even a topical on the temples can be a good way to start. That said, likely the most value would be in ingesting the medications. And I see a great deal of patients who get benefits out of CBD-rich medications in specific for migraines. Every patient differs in their experience with cannabis. While some cannabis patients using THC to address migraines receive benefit, others may find that THC is not so helpful for their migraines and may in fact exacerbate their symptomatic expression. I think for new patients with migraines, it's best to consider CBD-rich medications as a starting point and work your way through a range of ratios so that you're able to see how your individual body responds. Cannabis is biphasic, meaning it's very much dose dependent. A small dose may have a very different effect than a larger dose. So really, when starting to address it's best to and get a lens on individual body response to those medications. If you're comfortable with a small amount of psychoactivity, I often recommend an even amount of CBD to THC as the go-to ratio for migraines, in the sense that it often provides the strongest analgesic response for the most number of patients. You can approach your dosing for migraines in a number of different ways. Some migraine patients approach it as an acute need only medication and utilize their cannabis only when they're beginning to experience their migraines. Whereas migraines and menstrually related migraines may find that they do better and see more movement regularly as an acute need context. If that's the case for you, I would highly recommend 2 to 3 times a day, in particular CBD-rich medications, as your way to address chronic migraines or menstrually or hormonally related migraines in the long term. If you're looking at CBD medications to address your migraines, take note that an even balance of THC can be the most effective analgesic for most patients, and anything that has an even amount of CBD to THC is considered a CBD-rich medication. Those ratios can move from 1:1 all the way over to, for example, 30:1, which would be considered a pediatric appropriate CBD-rich medication. Migraine patients may experience benefits quite immediately when consuming cannabis as a way to address their concerns. In particular, systems like vaporizing, like that are sublingual, may provide the most rapid benefits. That said, patients may also consider that they may get more benefits by regularly consuming
When facing breast cancer, it's a very frightening journey. There are 3 different primary types of breast cancer. You have ER/PR positive, you have HER2 positive, and you have triple negative. Each one of these are treated a little differently. About 60% of all breast cancer cases are ER/PR positive. So there's wonderful treatments. The success rates of allopathic medicine, chemotherapy, radiation are quite effective. By using cannabis along with that, we have found that people come through on the other side of their traditional treatments much more successfully, much more quickly, without missing some of their treatments because they're so debilitated from them that they have to extend their treatments, etc. I recommend that you start with a 1-to-2 ratio of THC to CBD. So for example, if you're taking 10 milligrams of THC, you would take 20 of CBD. You have to start low and increase slowly, just like anything else. There is no milligram per kilogram calculation that we view for cannabis. It just doesn't work. All the evidence we see in the research is it is not best dosed that way. So unfortunately, it does take a little bit more work on your part besides stepping on the scale and doing the math. But by having the ratio to start with, you know that you start and keep increasing. The reason that we say to start with that ratio is because we know that there are something called the ID1 gene, and the ID1 gene is what causes cancer cells to metastasize and spread throughout your body, and the CBD will aggressively intercept the translation or cancel out the translation of this gene that causes the cells to metastasize. The THC is necessary because of the way that it activates the CB1 and CB2 receptors to actually kill the cancer cells. So on an average, 40-year-old might be between grams of THC, 50 to 100 milligrams of THC, and your CBD might be between 1 and 200 milligrams of CBD. I know this sounds like an awful lot, but when you're treating cancer, that's often what it takes. The older the patient, we found that the lower the dose is, with exceptions. We've had children that are on very, very high doses. So don't be afraid of it, because interestingly enough, when you need these high doses, your body will accept it in a way that it won't if you're just taking it as a healthy person. So of the numbers, wait till you get your scans back and see what's working. If you're only treating the side effects of the treatment for breast cancer, when they start working and you're not having the side effects, you know you've reached your therapeutic dose. If the 1-to-2 doesn't work, you can always go to a 1-to-1 ratio. Wouldn't go the other way with a 1-to-1 or. If you're not having success with a 1-to-2 ratio, the one that I would increase would be the THC, not the CBD. One of the things that's very important, though, is whole plant medicine, whole plant THC and whole plant CBD medicines work better than the distillate or the isolates that are being put out and marketed as products. They're mass produced. So you want to make sure that when you're picking your products, that you pick those that are made from. How do you know this? You ask to see the lab results of the medicine. Ask how it was made. Ask what was in it. Ask who do it, and do your research. You have to be more actively involved when you're selecting a product than you would if you're going to the pharmacy, because as long as we don't have federal FDA approval, we're not having licensed pharmacists, we have bud tenders that are giving you the medicine. The research that we've done on THC killing HER2-positive breast cancer cells and triple-negative breast cancer cells are so exciting. In fact, in the case of HER2-positive, we have found in preclinical, now this is only in petri dishes and in mice and not in humans, but we have found from in a clinical setting that THC works as effectively as lapatinib, which is a targeted first round drug to treat many of these patients. Triple negative, we have found exactly the same thing. Targeted treatment for triple negative, frightening word a woman, her diagnosis that you have triple negative. But there is hope with it, because We're finding petri dish in mice and in our patients that are still walking around that using THC and CBD together is very effective in helping them to get to a therapeutic dose and have it be tolerable in such a way that they still have quality of life. So give it a try. See, you're going to have to get your dose. I would also start out with a 1-to-1 in this case, not a 1-to-2. The ER positive ratio with HER2 positive and triple negative, I would do a 1-to-1 ratio from the very beginning. Start low and increase as quickly as you can.
There's a great deal of international research that shows that MS patients can benefit significantly from cannabis. On top of that, we also have a great deal of on the ground anecdotal evidence that MS patients receive benefits from cannabis, in particular CBD-rich medications. International studies have shown that cannabis can reduce spasticity, improve muscle tone, significant parts of the quality of life that these patients are needing and seeking. A recent study of MS patients engaged with cannabis showed that compared to a placebo group, patients who were consuming cannabis to address their MS had a reduction of body soreness by twofold as compared to those who were not consuming it. Those same patients who experienced such a great reduction in muscle stiffness also experienced a reduction of pain overall and radically improved sleep as compared to the placebo group who did not engage in cannabis. When you're approaching cannabis medications as a new patient with MS who's seeking out options, I think looking at CBD-rich medications is probably the most significant point to take note of. Delivery systems will also matter a great deal for MS patients in terms of their ability to engage with the medications. But what I see in my personal experience is that CBD-rich tinctures and CBD-rich full extract oils are typically the easiest and most beneficial for MS patients. Also a great value. For MS patients, when approaching cannabis, I think it's important to look at what your most significant problematic symptomatic expression is. Meaning some MS patients experience pain as their number one problem in relation to their MS, whereas others, mobility is a bigger concern. Certainly, the type of cannabis medications that you can consume will affect different components of your experience as an MS patient. If someone needs improved sleep, they look towards THC or CBN as options, as opposed to patients with MS that are looking for improved muscle movement, reduced spasticity, and improved tone, then CBD-rich medications might be a better option. When dealing with a chronic ailment like MS, it's really important to consider the frequency of dosing. I personally suggest 2 to 3 times a day at a minimum, up to even 4 for patients that are experiencing something like MS, wherein it affects the quality of life throughout the day and evening. Variety deliveries to engage with
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Clerk will sound the chimes. Members indicate your presence on the roll call. Clerk will take the roll. In 98 members voting aye, no members voting nay. Quorum is declared and the House is ready to proceed. Next order of business, the excuse of absent members. Gentleman from Spencer.
Mr. Speaker, I move you, sir, that the absent members be excused in accordance with the House rules.
Without objection, so ordered. Gentleman from Spencer.
Mr. Speaker, I move to suspend the rules for the purpose of allowing members who want to co-sponsor bills or submit vote modifications and who have filed the proper papers with the clerk to do so.
Without objection, so ordered. Next order of business is the approval of the journal. Gentleman from McCracken.
Mr. Speaker, I move you, sir, that the journal from Thursday, March 16, 2023 be approved as written.
Without objection, the journal from Thursday, March 16, 2023 is approved as written. Next order of business, the introduction of guests. Chair recognizes the lady from Davis.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. We have multiple guests with us today. The gentleman from Graves 2 would like to welcome the Mayfield Graves County student leadership. The lady from Mercer 55 would like to welcome her page for the day, Kendall Dawson. The lady from Butler would like to welcome Tennille Riley and Diane Ingram from Morgan, well, part of them are from Bowling Green now. One of them's moved, and her page, Reese Ingram. The lady from Kenton 64 would like to welcome Katie Adams with her today. She testified in committee. And a very special birthday to a gentleman that is hidden because he knows that I'm going to acknowledge he has a birthday today. The gentleman from Rockcastle has a birthday, so when you see him, remind him he's getting older and we love him for it. Yay! So please make all of our guests feel welcome and wish the gentleman a special happy birthday.
Chair recognizes the lady from Fayette 88.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I would like to welcome a good buddy from college. Patrick Kelch is here in the gallery. We would also like to welcome all of those people that are here exercising their First Amendment rights in the Capitol and over in the Annex today. Thanks to all of you that are here. Thanks to you that are watching at home. Let's make them all feel welcome.
Next order of business is reading of communications from the governor. Clerk, please report.
Veto message from the Governor of the Commonwealth of Kentucky. I, Andy Beshear, Governor of the Commonwealth of Kentucky, pursuant to the authority granted under Section 88 of the Kentucky Constitution, do hereby veto the following bills. House Bill 4 of the 2023 regular session of the General Assembly in its entirety. House Bill 329 of the 2023 regular session of the General Assembly in its entirety. House Bill 395 of the 2023 regular session of the General Assembly in its entirety. House Bill 519 of the 2023 regular session of the General Assembly in its entirety. House Bill 568 of the 2023 regular session of the General Assembly in its entirety, and House Joint Resolution 69 of the 2023 regular session of the General Assembly in its entirety.
Thank you, Mr. Clerk. Next order of business, report of committees. There being no need. The next order of business is the orders of the day. Gentleman from McCracken.
Mr. Speaker, I move you, sir, that Senate Bill 93 be taken from the Committee on Rules and placed in the regular orders of the day for action today.
Without objection, so ordered. Gentleman from McCracken.
Mr. Speaker, I move you, sir, that House Bills 4, 329, 395, 519, 568, and House Joint Resolution 69 be taken from the Committee on Rules, placed in the orders of the day for action on the governor's vetoes.
Without objection, so ordered. Gentleman from McCracken.
Mr. Speaker, I yield to the gentleman from Pendleton for action on a citation.
Chair recognizes the gentleman from Pendleton.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I would like to call legislative citation number 86 and have it read by title only.
Clerk, please report.
Citation 86, Representative Hart. Citation of achievement. The House of Representatives of the Commonwealth of Kentucky hereby recognizes and honors the members and coaches of the Pendleton County High School Lady Cats basketball team.
Gentleman from Pendleton.
Mr. Speaker, it is my privilege to have in the gallery members of the Pendleton County Lady Cats basketball team. They have a record of 21 wins, 8 losses this season, and were the 38th district champions. They also had the honor of setting 2 records this season. They set the school record with the most wins in a single season, and they set a state record for 3rd team with the most points scored in the first half. Mr. Speaker and members, could you please make them feel welcome? And Lady Cats, would you please stand up and be recognized? Mr. Speaker, I move adoption of legislative citation number 86.
Without objection, so ordered. Gentleman from McCracken.
Mr. Speaker, I yield to the lady from Davis for an announcement to the majority.
Chair recognizes the lady from Davis.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The majority caucus will caucus in the Supreme Court chambers immediately upon recess. And hopefully that wasp doesn't get the floor leader that's buzzing around him. So immediately upon recess, Supreme Court chambers. Thank you.
Members take note. Gentleman from McCracken.
Mr. Speaker, I yield to the lady from Fayette 88 for an announcement to the minority.
Chair recognizes the lady from Fayette 88.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The majority will caucus in Capitol Room 316 upon recess. Thank you.
Members take note. Gentleman from McCracken.
Mr. Speaker.
Enjoy that, lady from Fayette.
Mr. Speaker, I move that the House be in recess to the call of the chair.
Without objection, the House stand in recess to the call of the chair.
receive benefits from cannabis, in particular CBD-rich medications. International studies have shown that cannabis can reduce spasticity, improve muscle tone, reduce muscle soreness, and overall improve mobility for MS patients. These are hugely significant parts of the quality of life that these patients are needing and seeking. A recent study of MS patients engaged with cannabis showed that compared to a placebo group, patients who were consuming cannabis to address their MS had a reduction of body soreness by twofold as compared to those who were not consuming it. Those same patients who experienced such a great reduction in muscle stiffness also experienced a reduction of pain overall and radically improved sleep as compared to the placebo group who did not engage in cannabis. When you're approaching cannabis medications as a new patient with MS who's seeking out options, I think looking at CBD-rich medications is probably the most significant point to take note of. Delivery systems will also matter a great deal for MS patients in terms of their ability to engage with the medications. But what I see in my personal experience is that CBD-rich tinctures and CBD-rich full extract oils are typically the easiest and most beneficial for MS patients, and topicals are also of great value. For MS patients, when approaching cannabis, I think it's important to look at what your most significant problematic symptomatic expression is. Meaning some MS patients experience pain as their number one problem in relation to their MS, whereas others, mobility is a bigger concern. Certainly, the type of cannabis medications that you can consume will affect different components of your experience as an MS patient. If someone needs improved sleep, you might look towards THC or CBN as options, as opposed to patients with MS that are looking for improved muscle movement, reduced spasticity, and improved tone, then CBD-rich medications might be a better option. When dealing with a chronic ailment like MS, it's really important to consider the frequency of dosing. I personally suggest 2 to 3 times a day at a minimum, up to even 4 for patients that are experiencing something like MS, wherein it affects their quality of life throughout the day and evening. While there's a wide variety of delivery systems for patients with MS to engage with, my personal preferences would be to consider tinctures and topicals first, and then perhaps move your way into vaporizing, capsules, edibles, and other formats as well, depending on your needs. The reason to focus on tinctures and topicals first is that with tinctures, you're able to move very, very slowly in your dosing protocol, whatever type of cannabinoid you're engaged with. And topicals, given that they produce no psychoactive effects, are an easy go-to for MS patients to feel safe if they're new to cannabis and know that they will not experience any psychoactivity whatsoever. MS patients trying out cannabis as a medication option are likely to receive benefits immediately. That said, those benefits are likely to also improve over time as the patient continues their cannabis dosing protocol. While we don't have enough data and research to suggest that cannabis can cure MS, I think that what we do know from both research and anecdotal experience is that the benefits of cannabis to MS patients are so significant that we should continue to push forward both in our experiential engagement with it and in our research.
Cannabis is very effective for fibromyalgia. In fact, most of the pharmaceutical treatments that exist for fibromyalgia don't actually help the majority of fibromyalgia patients, and they come with a laundry list of side effects. For example, Lyrica. Lyrica was one of the most recent drugs on the market, And I think the statistics on it was like it only helped like 10% of patients, and then it only provided like 5% extra symptom relief. So you're like, wow, I'm 5% less in pain. Like, was that even worth paying for this drug? It also increases weight gain. Like a lot of times people will gain about 30 pounds after several months on this drug. And we know that fibromyalgia pain is associated with like when you have more weight gain, you're more in pain. So this was a drug that was not very beneficial, but was approved by the FDA. On the other hand, you have cannabis where you have a drug here that is actually reducing pain, I think, in over 90% of fibromyalgia patients. There's been several studies, no real solid, like double-blind, randomized controlled clinical trials, but every single survey that comes back or every type of outreach effort comes back that these fibromyalgia patients that have found no relief in anything that they've done, from antidepressants to anti-seizure drugs, to all these different drugs that just dope you up or make you feel horrible, they're not effective. And then these patients have been told for years that cannabis is not a real treatment, it's bunk. Their nonprofit groups wouldn't support it. And I know this because I have fibromyalgia, and I've done outreach to things like the National Fibromyalgia Association, and I'd be like, hey guys, here's the data, a new study came out, can I train your members on this? They're like, that's not real. And finally this year they're like, oh yeah, I think it might be real. Speak to patients that are using cannabis for the first time for fibromyalgia. It's really, explore all your options. Explore THC, explore CBD, explore topicals. If you have one bad experience, don't write it off. You might actually have to be diligent and experience some unpleasant effects to find out the thing that worked for you. I mean, it's not going to be like, I tried this one strain and I found it the first time. You might actually have to try like 15 strains. You might have to take a journal. You might have to actually be your own like lab rat. And as long as you've been sick, I say patients don't give up. Just don't give up. Keep talking, reach out to nonprofit groups that do care, reach out to experts, reach out to doctors, and keep working with yourself. You'll find it. And when you find that relief, it's nice because you don't have to change like the script. It's not like it stops working or you're more tolerant. Once you find out something that works for you, it's going to work for a long time, and it's going to give you the life you want. So to see the results of cannabis for fibromyalgia, that timeline is going to be different from each patient. I mean, if you're looking for, say, spasm relief and you have a topical, you're going to see some instant results, right? Or pain. So it doesn't take, weeks for a topical to work. You can know pretty fast, okay, I use this topical and I'm not in pain anymore. It might take, a couple minutes, it might take 30 minutes, it might take an hour, but you're going to feel something, which is nice. Unless the product is not good, then you're not going to feel anything. For things like vapes, right? If you're in pain, you're going to feel probably psychoactivity first before you feel pain relief. So you're going to know, I took some THC. Again, I recommend that all autoimmune patients take THC plus CBD. That is definitely a necessity because you want to reduce the inflammation and the pain. So you always want to have ratio products, whether you're smoking it, whether you're eating it, whether you're taking tinctures, things like that. Always include both CBD and THC. It's the magic combo for autoimmune. But it may take you, a full month to start really feeling the effects of reduced inflammation in your body. That's autoimmune is all about inflammation, and it takes a while to sort of repair your body. It's so used to being sick.
A diagnosis of a brain tumor is probably one of the most frightening conversations that you can have with your doctor, because we don't know a lot of people walking around years and years later after a diagnosis of brain cancer because of the traditional treatments just do not work that well. Their survival is measured in months instead of years. We have found, though, that the brain is just filled with CB1 and CB2 receptors, especially CB1 receptors. So if your tumor is within your brain, you have a lot to target with cannabinoid therapy. So it's very, very hopeful. We've had many people who have been in hospice who come out of hospice after beginning cannabis treatment because all of a sudden the cancer cells that were growing out of control stop and start reversing that train and going the other way and start shrinking. So I would, like anything else, in this case, I would start out with a ratio of closer to 3-to-1 of THC to CBD in treating a brain tumor. And I would look at this getting that dose up as high as you can, as quickly as you can. The receptors are there. Now, having said that, there is one that's called DIPG. And DIPG is in the brainstem. And unfortunately, there just are not the CB1 receptors for the cannabinoids to activate in the brainstem. So it can be a lot more devastating. And even with that diagnosis, though, we have found extended life and far, far greater quality of life when treating it with traditional medicine along with cannabinoids. Oftentimes, when oncologists are talking about life expectancy when it comes to brain tumors, they're measuring it in months. They'll say, we're going to put you through this rigorous treatment, and we are going to give you all these things. And yes, you're going to feel miserable, and you're going to be in pain, and you're going to be vomiting, and you're going to go bald, but you're going to live 2 months longer. And so then you're faced with, is this really the 2 months that I want? Am I willing to pay the price for that? Or am I willing to just go home and live my life, kiss my wife, kiss my husband, kiss my children, and be done? Cannabis is a phenomenal option. We found in preclinical research, working out of Spain, that cannabinoids, THC in particular, does an amazing job of killing brain cancer cells. We have phenomenal success with glioblastoma multiforme, which is the same as if you have like an astrocytoma stage 4. So that's also a GBM. A GBM is really any brain tumor that has, it's over 50% of all brain tumors. We do treat them all the same though. We do treat them with a 3-to-1 ratio initially of THC to CBD. The dose is what's very different based upon the individual patient, the individual case, and tolerance and ability to take the medicine and still have quality of life. Because at the end of the day, that is what is most important, is that you're using this, but you're not in fact debilitated by the cannabis therapies. We also know that if the 3-to-1 ratio is not working for you, and you've tried it and you've gone through your scan periods and you've gotten up to what the doctor and you have determined is a therapeutic dose, there is still hope, because you can flip that to a 1-to-3 ratio. I wouldn't suggest that you start out at that point with the higher CBD and the lower THC, because we know how to target those receptors directly. But if you're not having success, because every cancer is different, then you can flip that ratio. I do recommend that you work with your doctor to come up with a dose that's effective for you. If your doctor doesn't know, then you look at Green Flower Media, which is what you're doing right now, which is smart because they have a lot of experts they've pulled together who understand how to treat these different diseases. Now, oftentimes people who have brain tumors end up experiencing seizures as a result of either the location of the brain tumor or the radiation that they have to treat it, in which case you also need to then treat to avoid having more seizures with some of the, sometimes more CBD. You have to have some THC for that. You have to look at the raw cannabinoids such as THCA, which is what you have before you heat the plant, and it's in its raw form. And this can be extremely effective in mitigating seizures. So not only are you faced with the cancer treatment, but then you also have to address the side effects from the treatments or from the location of the tumor, which you can do with some of the raw cannabinoids. Cannabis is very beneficial when you're treating brain tumors. It can work along with your standards of care with chemotherapy and radiation and make them work more effectively. In fact, there's research that shows that when you put THC along with TMZ, which is a first-line treatment for brain tumors, that both of them work 50% better than they work alone. So that's very hopeful. It will also work very effectively to manage the side effects of the chemotherapy and radiation, including the option in case you have seizures, because seizures are often a side effect of the placement of the tumor within your brain and also from the radiation that people receive to to kill the cancer and to shrink the tumors. So in either case, cannabis is very effective to help with the mitigation of side effects and the cancer. There is no such thing as a cure. There is no cure. And if somebody says there is, run as fast as you can the other way. Cancer is a chronic, systemic disease and has to be treated that way. It's not something that happens to you from the outside like the common cold and that you get over it and you'll never get that type of cold again. It's something that's in you and has to be treated and has to be managed. Once you finish your treatment and you've gotten to a point where you have no evidence of disease, or they can't tell on the scans whether it's scarring or tumor, and you're at that point, you can go to a maintenance dose over time, slowly get to a maintenance dose, but you're going to have to remain on that maintenance dose indefinitely, because it is going to still be in your body. And when our evidence shows that when people stop, then over time the tumors do return.
Gentleman from McCracken.
Mr. Speaker, I move you, sir, that House Bill 4 be taken from its place in the orders of the day for consideration of the governor's veto and motions related thereto.
Clerk, please report.
House Bill 4, an act relating to merchant electric generating facilities and making an appropriation therefor. Representative Branscombe.
Gentleman from McCracken.
Mr. Speaker, would you please have the clerk report the veto to House Bill 4?
Clerk, please report.
Veto message from the governor on House Bill 4 in its entirety.
Gentleman from McCracken.
Mr. Speaker, I am confused by the governor's veto message to House Bill 4, who cites this bill undermining local control. Well, several organizations that care deeply about local control have endorsed this bill and encouraged us to override the governor's veto. So I am confused why the Kentucky Association of Counties, the Kentucky League of Cities, the Kentucky Judges Executives Association, and the Kentucky Associations of Magistrates and Commissioners are all in favor of House Bill 4, all want us to override this veto, this confusing veto message from the governor. Mr. Speaker, I don't usually like to debate veto messages. These are usually my favorite thing to do, is override the veto of any governor, including the last one, as we did many, many times. This is truly legislative independence at its finest. So with that, Mr. Speaker, even though I'm confused by this message, I proudly, sir, move you, sir, final passage of House Bill 4, the veto of the governor notwithstanding.
Question before the body is final passage of House Bill 4, the governor's veto notwithstanding. Is there any discussion? Seeing none, clerk will sound the chimes. Those in favor vote aye. Those opposed, nay. Roll call is open for your vote. Have all members voted? Would any member wish to explain or change their vote? Seeing none, clerk will take the roll. Being 81 members voting aye, 17 members voting nay, House Bill 4, the governor's veto notwithstanding, is finally passed. Gentleman from McCracken.
Move the clincher.
Without objection, clincher is applied. Gentleman from McCracken.
Mr. Speaker, I move you, sir, that House Bill 329 be taken from its place in the orders today for consideration of the governor's veto and motions related thereto.
Clerk, please report.
House Bill 329, an act relating to government contract review and declaring an emergency. Representative Hart.
Gentleman from McCracken.
Mr. Speaker, would you have the clerk report the veto message to House Bill 329?
Clerk, please report.
Veto message in its entirety, House Bill 329.
Gentleman from McCracken.
Mr. Speaker, I move for final passage of House Bill 329, the veto of the governor notwithstanding.
Question before the body is final passage of House Bill 329, governor's veto notwithstanding. Is there any discussion? Seeing none, clerk will sound the chimes. Those in favor vote aye. Those opposed, nay. Roll call is open for your vote. Have all members voted? Does any member wish to change or explain their vote? Clerk will take the roll. Means 79 members voting aye, 19 members voting nay. House Bill 329, the governor's veto notwithstanding, is finally passed. Gentleman from McCracken.
Move the clincher.
Without objection, clincher is applied. Gentleman from McCracken.
Mr. Speaker, move you, sir, that House Bill 395 be taken from its place in the orders today for consideration of the governor's veto and motions related thereto.
Clerk, please report.
House Bill 395, an act relating to project oversight of governmental information technology resources. Representative Pratt.
Gentleman from McCracken.
Mr. Speaker, would you please have the clerk report the veto message to House Bill 395?
Clerk, please report.
Veto message from the governor, House Bill 395 in its entirety.
Gentleman from McCracken.
Mr. Speaker, I move for final passage of House Bill 395, the veto of the governor notwithstanding.
Question before the body is final passage of House Bill 395, the governor's veto notwithstanding. Is there any discussion? Seeing none, clerk will sound the chimes. Those in favor vote aye. Those opposed, nay. Roll call is open for your vote. All members voted? Does any member wish to change or explain their vote? Clerk will take the roll. Being 90 members voting aye, 8 members voting nay, House Bill 395, the governor's veto notwithstanding, is finally passed. Gentleman from McCracken.
Move the clincher.
Without objection, clincher is applied. Gentleman from McCracken.
Mr. Speaker, I move you, sir, that House Bill 519 be taken from its place in the orders of the day for consideration of the governor's veto and motions related thereto.
Clerk, please report.
House Bill 519, an act relating to tourist and convention commissions in counties containing a city of the first class or a consolidated local government and declaring an emergency. Representative McPherson.
Gentleman from McCracken.
Mr. Speaker, would you please have the clerk report the veto message to House Bill 519?
Clerk, please report.
Veto message from the governor, House Bill 519 in its entirety.
Gentleman from McCracken.
Mr. Speaker, I move final passage of House Bill 519, the veto of the governor notwithstanding.
Question before the body is final passage of House Bill 519, the governor's veto notwithstanding. Is there any discussion? Seeing none, clerk will sound the chimes. Those in favor vote aye. Those opposed, nay. Roll call is open for your vote. All members voted? Does any member wish to change or explain their vote? Clerk will take the roll. Being 90 members voting aye, 7 members voting nay, House Bill 519, the governor's veto notwithstanding, is finally passed. Gentleman from McCracken.
Move the clincher.
Without objection, clincher is applied. Gentleman from McCracken.
Mr. Speaker, I move you, sir, that House Bill 568 be taken from its place in the orders of the day for consideration of the governor's veto and motions related thereto.
Clerk, please report.
House Bill 568, an act relating to the public defender system. Representative Nemus.
Gentleman from McCracken.
Mr. Speaker, would you please have the clerk report the veto message for House Bill 568?
Gentleman from McCracken.
Veto message from the governor on House Bill 568 in its entirety.
Gentleman from McCracken.
Mr. Speaker, I move for final passage of House Bill 568, the veto of the governor notwithstanding.
Question before the body is final passage of House Bill 568, the governor's veto notwithstanding. Is there any discussion? Seeing none, clerk will sound the chimes. Those in favor vote aye. Those opposed, nay. Roll call is open for your vote. Have all members voted? Does any member wish to change or explain their vote? Clerk will take the roll. Means 79 members voting aye, 19 members voting nay. House Bill 568, the governor's veto notwithstanding, is finally passed. Gentleman from McCracken.
Move the clincher.
Objection, clincher is applied. Gentleman from McCracken.
Mr. Speaker, move you, sir, that House Joint Resolution 69 be taken from its place in the orders of the day for consideration of the governor's veto and motions related thereto.
Clerk, please report.
House Joint Resolution 69, a joint resolution directing the governor or his designee to certify the Environmental Protection Agency that the Kentucky Board of Radon Safety has legal and administrative authority to enter into a grant with the EPA, including specifically the receipt and administration of EPA state indoor radon grant funding. Representative Duvall.
Gentleman from McCracken.
Mr. Speaker, would you have the clerk report the veto message to House Joint Resolution 69?
Clerk, please report.
Veto message from the governor, House Joint Resolution 69 in its entirety.
Gentleman from McCracken.
Mr. Speaker, I move for final passage of House Joint Resolution 69, the veto of the governor notwithstanding.
Question before the body is final passage of House Joint Resolution 69, the governor's veto notwithstanding. Is there any discussion? Seeing none, clerk will sound the chimes. Those in favor vote aye. Those opposed, nay. Roll call is open for your vote. Have all members voted? Does any member wish to change or explain their vote? Clerk will take the roll. There being 79 members voting aye, 19 members voting nay, House Joint Resolution, the governor's veto notwithstanding, is finally passed. Gentleman from McCracken.
Move the clincher.
Without objection, clincher is applied. Gentleman from McCracken.
Stand at ease.
House will stand at ease. House come to order. Gentleman from McCracken.
You, sir, the House being recessed for 15 minutes.
Without objection, the House stand in recess for 15 minutes.
Many different types of lung cancer. Cannabis can be very effective in treating lung cancer. There are many different types of lung cancers, and each one is treated differently. We recommend that you start with a 1-to-2 ratio of THC to CBD, and you increase from there as quickly as you're able to do. Oftentimes, people find that immediately they'll start having increased wellness, they'll feel better, the side effects of any other treatments are mitigated by using the cannabinoid therapies along with it, and it can stop the progression of the metastasis from the lung cancers, which oftentimes go to the brain. The receptors within your organs, within your lungs, are numerous. And so we have a lot to target within the lungs when treating lung cancer. So it is actually one of the ones that we have tremendous results with. And interestingly enough, we have better results using cannabis in treating lung cancer than the numbers that are traditionally associated with the survival rates of lung cancer patients just using traditional allopathic medicines. If you're going through chemotherapy with lung cancer, you're going to want to use cannabis absolutely at the same time. Oftentimes, people also have extreme levels of radiation, and they end up with things like radiation pneumonitis and severe skin burns from the radiation. And the topicals can be extremely effective with the skin burning, and also the ingestion of the cannabinoids can help to mitigate some of the side effects of the radiation pneumonitis, which can be the side effects of the cancer, which can be more detrimental than the cancer itself in many cases. So yes, cannabis is a very effective first-line treatment for lung cancer. We do not recommend that you do it instead without having a really important conversation with your doctor guiding you. Now, if you come from a place where your doctors know nothing about cannabis, their first thing is going to be no. So you may have to make the decision to seek out a doctor in a location that does understand cannabis, who will work effectively with you along with your oncologist to come up with the best plan of treatment for you. Cannabis is an excellent, excellent first-line treatment, though, and I think that you will find that by using it, you can tolerate other treatments much more better, much more effectively, and that you'll have greater outcomes than you would without it, and have a much more hopeful outlook on life, because it actually does make you happier. It does make you happier. Now, I want to say, you want to make sure, though, that you also are eliminating any sugars from your diet. Anything that metabolizes into glucose, you're going to want to be careful with, because of the feeding the cancer cells with the glucose, especially in lung cancer. That's very, very important. I'm asked on a regular basis if you can smoke cannabis while you have lung cancer, or is it good for it, is it bad for it? And the studies show that there is no evidence that there's an increase in lung cancer. In fact, there's a decrease in lung cancer among people who smoke cannabis. We have a very complicated world we're living in right now, with people using pesticides and all sorts of other microtoxins that are appearing in the medicine. So you have to be very, very careful, because the cannabinoids and the terpenes that are actually the cannabis plant are great, but you want to make sure that it's very clean medicine. If you are in fact going to smoke it, you've got to see lab results and trust that those lab results are accurate in showing pesticides, microbials, aflatoxins, etc. Because those things are not good for your lungs. So you don't want to, at the same time that you're putting something good in, put something bad. I would suggest that if you want to use, you want to smoke along with your other treatments, because you cannot get to a therapeutic dose from smoking. You must ingest it in addition to smoking. That you use something that's at a very, very low temperature, a vaporizer at the lowest temperature that you can get it to vaporize, and that also that you make sure that you start out with extremely clean flowers or oils, and that is where you have to look at the lab results. Now, does cannabis cure lung cancer? I cannot stress enough that there is no such thing as a cure for cancer. Cannabis can put you into remission. Cannabis can help other treatments work much more effectively. Cannabis can also help with all the side effects that you're going to experience as a result of your other treatments. You may have to stay on the cannabis, though, for the rest of your life. Not in the same doses that you have to use to get rid of the cancer, but we have found that when people stop using it, even after several years, that the cancer cells can come back. That's the same thing, though, with any other treatment. Because there is no cure, it is a chronic systemic disease. However, you can live a very normal, productive life on the low doses that you would be required for maintenance treatment of lung cancer. So no cure, but long-term hope and long-term survival. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, wherever you are in the world that you're watching this right now. I'm so grateful to be part of the Green Flower family, and have been invited back. Last year's summit was transformative in many ways. The feedback that I got from around the world really let me know the opportunity that we have to be impactful in education, because if we don't do it, nobody else will, right? Because we have so many people out there with misinformation, the Dr. Google, the Dr. Facebook, all of that. So I'm here today to take you through just some basic dosing protocols for some standard disease categories. I know that doesn't sound very fun, but I think that there'll be some information here. So I want to start you out by taking a look at how we do it. When I first got into the cannabis, for some of you who may know already, I was searching for a solution for some of my own issues and some of my loved ones, and I was just really overwhelmed at the dearth of information on dosing. My first experience was a Rice Krispie treat wrapped in saran wrap that had a piece of masking tape on it, and it said 5 to 20 doses. What does that even mean? So as a result, I said, okay, I'm an engineer. I'm a process engineer. I'm going to figure this out. So the question that my organization and I have been setting to answer all these years is there in fact a way to accurately and consistently dose cannabinoids and terpenes over time across disease sets? That's a big question, but everything we've done from that point forward has been to solve that. First thing that we did was we set up a line of products that we started making medicines, very specifically understanding the content of them to the milligram of what was in them as far as the cannabinoid terpene compounds. Understanding the composition is the best we can. Of course, at the beginning, they only tested for a little bit. Now we have the benefit of a lot more cannabinoids and terpenes that we actually understand with much deeper knowledge. Then the next thing I had to do is I had to get doctors to understand how to use cannabis with their patients. Not the doc in the box writing the recommendation, walk in, they basically are finished with their practices, and this is a way to make some money at the end. You spend 10 minutes with somebody, maybe, and they may or may not even know anything about cannabis. Let's have doctors who truly are educated and involved in understanding how to work and integrate cannabis as part of your total patient care. So it's not like I go to a cannabis doctor or I go to an oncologist. You and your oncologist should have this discussion that also includes cannabis because of the endocannabinoid system and its primary place in the body. So that's what the California Spring Wellness is, the doctors. And then Zelda Therapeutics, we started to run clinical trials as a way of validating all this work that we've done in a way that organizations like the DEA and FDA will see this and be able to say, okay, this is bona fide, double-blind, real clinical trials like they would expect for them to have wide adoption. Because without having the wide adoption into the medical community, I don't see cannabis ever being more than a quaint for us early adopters, which frankly, most of us that are even tuning into this today are early adopters. We're people that have been paying attention and seeing what's going on. Most people have no idea about drugs at all. They go to their physician gives them a drug, they take it, they don't even know the name of it. All you have to do is look at our intake process and you'll see how often people have no idea how many drugs they're taking, what they are, what they're for, the mechanisms of action, the side effects. It's just, so it's up to us to create a better medical paradigm that it's more of a cooperation and conversation between the medical community and the patients. So that's all that's about. So the first thing that I want to say here is that cannabis is not, in fact, a panacea. If you look at the report that came out recently, it shows that cannabis is very effective on pain associated with oncological conditions, with cancers. It's got uses for MS, and I believe there was one other, and that's about all. Well, that's one end of the incorrect spectrum. And then the other end of the spectrum is cannabis is a panacea for everything. And that just simply is not true. Cannabis is not a panacea. Cannabis is amazing. Cannabis is wonderful. But cannabis is not going to get rid of every condition you've ever had. It's wonderful in the way that it works synergistically with the conditions. Project CBD has on their website, if you go to it, a list of some of the conditions that they see that are benefited by cannabinoid therapies, cannabis in general. This slide here I want you to look at, I may need to update it. I have to take a look because I think a couple other conditions have been, but I have to see where there's overlap. But this is a list of the conditions that at this point right now are legal in various states. California, of course, is a complete exception because we actually made the decision to leave cannabis medicine in the hands of the doctors to make that determination and not the legislators, because frankly, you don't want the government deciding what conditions are helped by a medicine, which is what the case is in many states. I'll give you an example. I had a patient that came to us and said, I've got cancer, da 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 da, but I can't get the medicine until I'm stage 4. And that's just, it's absurd. It's like you have to be circling the drain before you can actually help. When we know synergistically from trials, from real bona fide science, we know of the synergy between cannabinoids and standard chemotherapy drugs and other targeted methods. So we have a lot of work to do in those areas. And if you're not fortunate enough to have one of these conditions that fits in the state you are in, what kind of access to medicine is that as far as equal rights and equal access across this country? So enough of the politicizing on that frame there. So what I'm going to talk to you today about is some strategies on dosing around the various conditions. I'm going to be looking at seizure disorders, pain, immune disorders, and cancer. I know this is a lot to do in a very short period of time, so don't expect this to be completely, and if you don't hear anything that resonates with you, you can always reach out to me. I know that the folks at Green Flower are very good at coordinating how we can get together. So the first thing we're going to look at is the seizure disorders, and I'm going to look at epilepsy. This was all based upon a little boy with Lennox-Gastaut syndrome. In this case, we're not going to be going into it. That's for a much, much longer talk for a different audience. But I do want to talk to you about the various mechanisms of action. And one of the things that's so important about this is that you are informed so that when you're talking to your medical professional, that you can push back with something other than emotion or anecdotal evidence and things that you're seeing on Facebook and on Google. These are actual real information that we know from the scientific community based upon preclinical research done. So we know that the THC activates the CB1 receptors, which shorts out the calcium ion pump on presynaptic neurons. This may potentially stops grand mal seizures. Anybody who's seen any of the Sanjay Gupta work on seizures, that was one case. And I'll tell you right now, you've treated one epilepsy patient, you've treated one epilepsy patient. Each one is very, very individual, but we do know some of the mechanisms. The CBD is proven to reduce seizures, as well as it's a neuroprotectant. The government had a patent on it for years as a neuroprotectant, and it's been confirmed that it partially mediates the serotonin receptors, and that's verified by GW Pharmaceuticals. THCA appears to work very similarly in mechanism of action to CBD. In fact, we find with patients that they go through a plateau after about 3 months or so, where the CBD is no longer working quite as effectively, and we'll oftentimes at that point, we will switch them to a THCA. We'll do this by using the raw, using a masticating blender, giving them to juice it and take it, and they're able to be very effective in that way. There's also some products that are coming out. Some of them work, some of them don't. You got to be watching what else is in there because there are 144 known cannabinoids at this point. So if it says THCA, unless it's an isolate, it's going to have a lot more in there than that. THCV and has some interesting things. One of the things that's beneficial about it is that it has the euphoria without the paranoia that so many people find undesirable in treating, especially when you're treating children. So how much to take? The first thing I would say is that's a very good question about epilepsy. It's the one that's most frustrating. I had a conversation once with Dr. Bonnie Goldstein, who has a specialty in epilepsy. And she said, she says, you've got it easy. You mainly treat cancer. Cancer's easy, right? She says, epilepsy's not. And I said, that's right. That's why I do cancer and not epilepsy. Because the reality is, I can tell you that a first starting dose might be to work up to titrate. And of course, you always start out with, 1/3 of a milligram or up to 1 milligram. And you titrate up slowly to find what a person's actual dose is. Because as soon as you have the effective treatment, you stop. Or as soon as you have where you can't acclimate to the psychoactivity, you back off because you don't have to feel medicated to be properly dosed. That's the myth that you have to be stoned. If you're stoned when you're medicating, you're taking too much. So we have it like just a very small amount initially. I would say that you're going to titrate up to about 100 milligrams of the CBD. That's what we find somewhere in there. To use a hemp-based CBD, you are not going to get the same results that you're going to get from a whole plant cannabis with the whole profile in it. Let hemp be used for all the wonderful things it's good for. Medicine for seizures does not happen to be one of them. And then we also recommend that the THCA at 100 milligrams, and this could be either with or instead of, or it can be reducing both the CBD and the THCA to see how they work together synergistically. A lot of time with seizure disorders, there's also a gastrointestinal component that's at where the child's having or the adult's having issues. And THCA, for any of you that have any kind of gastro, is a phenomenal for settling your stomach. So it's something that's to consider about anyway. All right. So the next thing we're going to look at is chronic pain. Chronic nerve pain. And I'm going to get a little bit more technical here, but I have confidence in all of you that I won't go too deep into the weeds. But the first thing I want to show you is that THC, it retards the electrochemical reaction at the peripheral pain receptors, as you can see on the slide that's on your screen right now. It interrupts the pain signal at the dorsal root ganglion, and that it also interrupts the pain signal at the neuron. If you look at what's happening, you have the presynaptic neuron and the postsynaptic, and it interrupts that in such a way where the pain signal is not able to actually go through, so that it eliminates the sensation of pain. All right. And then the thing to also remember is chronic pain does not hold any medical benefit. The fact that it's chronic, it's a disease state in itself that we have to treat. And you have to treat chronic pain like a disease. It's not a symptom of something else. It is the disease itself, just by the fact that it's chronic. We also activate the CB2 at the microglial cells, and I'll go into a little bit more. Let me show that here, how that works. My slide is not there. So I'll go back here and I'll talk about it instead. And the activation of the CB2 at the microglial cells, it provides a major anti-inflammatory response, and I'll show it to you in a second. And then psychoactive euphoric effects of short-term memory. So you have here what's going on. You have the CB1 receptors that are on all your periphery organs, your cells, that are all there to be activated by the THC and the other cannabinoids that we're not sure exactly which ones yet. You have the microglial, which its sole purpose, or its main purpose, is an inflammatory. It protects the central nervous system by reducing inflammation, destroying diseased neurons, and creating a sense of health. So the fact that the CB2 actually encourages and helps this to work more beneficially. And then the last thing on that is the euphoria and the short-term memory reduction that are both such benefits of anybody who's a long-term pain sufferer will tell you. Being in pain it owns your life. It takes over everything about your life. And the ability to forget is a gift. Besides getting into the thing of forgetting that we don't want to remember every face we ever see, we also want to be able to have a break from the pain. Anyone that, people talk about when they give birth, they don't remember because they would never have a second child. So so I think it'd be interesting to see what's happening in the internal endocannabinoid system during that process to see if there is in fact something that's allowing us in our recovery to forget. But that's for another study. So how much to take for chronic pain? So the first thing I would say is, let's talk for a minute about microdosing. Microdosing is a term that's being thrown around a lot these days. It's like the catchword of the week, it's like, or maybe the month, and it's wonderful. But let's look at what it really means. What microdosing means from a clinical standpoint when we're and our doctors are working with patients is the amount of medicine that you have to take to achieve your goal of the treatment without actually having to feel altered in any way. You should be able to take your medicine just like anything else and go about your regular day and not have to feel it. Now, the same dose that would make somebody who's perfectly healthy or not in pain very, very medicated and feel very altered and not comfortable in going about their business when they need it, they need that higher dose, it doesn't have that same impact. So you should also understand that on days that are worse, you may need more than you do on days when you're fine. So we're looking right now at the chronic nerve pain, and I would say that your first initial goal that you get to, and you do a reassessment at that point on whether you're on the right track, is to start, once again, always extremely low, and you start that and you go up from 1 milligram on up. And if you're at 30 milligrams of THC a day and you're taking that in a couple of different doses, maybe a little bit, 10% of that in the morning and the rest of it before bed, you should be able to start controlling your pain at that point, especially if you bring in CBD, because CBD will help to work very well as an anti-inflammatory along with the THC. And then, of course, the topicals. I can't say enough about topicals and their benefits potentially. Now, they're only going to help with pain that's relatively superficial. So if you have very, very deep pain, it's not going to get in there. It just doesn't have the mechanisms to do that. But for inflammation that's superficial, arthritic pain, neck and joint pain, lower back pain, knee pain, topicals are one. And the thing that I want to stress here also is you can use as much of the topical and as many times a day as you want. Because, I mean, I've had people say, oh, it really helped me, but then it wore off. And I'm like, well, then why didn't you use some more? Oh, well, you didn't tell me. Topical, you're fine. Go for it. Use it. Use it. So real quickly, go through the immune disorders, okay? This was actually looking at rheumatoid arthritis in this particular case. Inflammation is, in fact, the primary disorder with immune diseases. You have your body attacking itself. And so as a result, this slide's probably a little bit too complex for what we're talking about, but just trust me, it does reduce, in fact, the inflammation, as I talked earlier about its effect on the microglial cells, which purpose is to reduce inflammation. You have the THC doing this very effectively on the CB2 receptors that are on the microglial. It also works on other systems within there that are probably too technical for this, but it also triggers the affected cells to produce less of these inflammatory compounds. And then the CBD, of course, it has many scientific, many medical benefits as well. A lot of them that we don't know. We need to do a lot more research, but it protects the myelin sheath. That, if anybody is familiar with that term, it covers all the nerve cells. And if anyone's had any damage to them, it's a type of pain that truly you do not have to experience. And so CBD is a protectant for this. So what an easy way to protect something that's potentially so damaging to you. And then also it also inhibits the production of COX-2. And we've all heard on our late TV shows looking at commercials about COX-2 inhibitors and things like that. They throw these terms around. That really is something we want to do, is we want to inhibit the COX-2. But it's also a thing that I want to say is that because it's important with the immune response, that people understand that CBD has been said to suppress the immune system, and it does not. It modulates the immune system, which is a very, very different thing. It seems to increase the strength of it where it needs, and it seems to where it needs as well. So it's really a beautiful combination of that. All right, how much to take again? I would have you stay working up to the 30 milligrams of THC. If your dose is 10 milligrams and that's all it takes for you to achieve your objective, fantastic, then your dose is 10. This is based upon the research and the studies and the data I've been collecting for 6.5 years on patients. This is not going to work exactly for everybody, and that's the beautiful about the bespoke medicine that cannabis actually is. Then I want to have you on the CBD at 30 milligrams, also take it in one dose per day, and then have you then increase to include the topical as well. I personally have found that CBD is not quite as effective as THC in a topical for these types of pain disorders. I know that people like to come out with a lot of the CBD products and they think they can send them across state lines and do all these things. But there's not going to be any psychoactivity associated with this anyway. So go ahead and use the one that's going to be most effective. So I'm running out of time, so I'm going to go very, very quickly through cancer, which is kind of a crazy thing to do. There's 200 of them to have to do, and the subtypes of each one of them. But I'm going to go ahead and talk about the fact that THC, we know We know this evidentially, that it actually does take you through the process where it actually does kill cancer cells. We know that it stops the mutation, the angiogenesis, which is the blood supply to it, and the metastasis. And metastasis is what most people eventually end up dying from. So what happens is cannabis has been shown with Marinol and Durabinol and some of these other drugs to work very, very effectively against some of the side effects, but it's a really uncomfortable drug. So we also have found, though, that it also works on the actual tumor progression itself. So the hair loss, the anemia, the constipation, the bone and ache paining, cannabis can be a phenomenal benefit for that. So I'm going to skip through apoptosis. That means the programmed cell death. You have ID1 gene. Certain cancers contain the ID1 gene, and when they do, we are able to target them with a higher CBD, lower THC. And so I'm going to show you here. This was a breast cancer patient. We had her on 50 milligrams of THC. We had her on 50 milligrams of CBD, and she's been in remission for years. So it might be that your dose ends up being 400 milligrams, but we won't know until we look at scans and markers to see what's actually working for you. But this is a first target that you might want to consider in the way that you approach your treatment. In conclusion, the most important thing that I want to say is you have to have lab-tested medicines, and you have to have a conversation, speak with your doctor. If you get pushback, first try to educate your doctor, and if that doesn't work, find a new doctor. Thank you.
Just to introduce myself and why I wanted to discuss this autism epilepsy combination. I'm a pediatric neurologist. I'm an epileptologist. That's how I came into the
Action on the governor's vetoes.
That objection so ordered. Gentleman McCracken.
Mr. Speaker, I move you, sir, that Senate Bill 126 be taken from its place in the orders of the day for consideration of the governor's veto and motions related thereto.
Clerk, please report.
Senate Bill 126, an act relating to venue and declaring an emergency.
General McCracken.
Mr. Speaker, would you please have the clerk report the veto message to Senate Bill 126?
Clerk, please report.
Veto message from the governor. I, Andy Beshear, governor of the Commonwealth of Kentucky, pursuant to the authority granted under Section 88 of the Kentucky Constitution, do hereby veto the following Senate Bill 126 of the 2023 regular session of the General Assembly in its entirety.
Gentleman McCracken.
Mr. Speaker, I move final passage of Senate Bill 126, the veto of the governor notwithstanding.
Question before the body is final passage, Senate Bill 126, the governor's veto notwithstanding. Any discussion? Gentleman McCracken.
Mr. Speaker, I move to limit debate to 20 minutes per side on discussion of Senate Bill 126.
Motion is to limit debate. Motion of the gentleman from McCracken is to limit debate to 20 minutes per side for discussion of the veto override. Is there any, that motion is not under routine resolution majority passage. Those in favor, vote aye. Those opposed, nay. Roll call is open for your vote. Clerk will take the roll. Means 77 members voting aye, 12 members voting nay. Debate is limited for a period of 20 minutes per side on the issue of overriding the veto. Is there any discussion? Chair recognizes the lady from Campbell 67 for discussion of the matter.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I just rise to say the day is still early. We made it through the House vetoes pretty quickly. I'd like to think that's because we were a little cleaner with our bills than our fellow legislators down the hall. I think that the bills that we're about to look at, the Senate bills, warrant further debate, and I am disappointed by this decision.
Chair recognizes the gentleman from Franklin 57 for discussion of the matter.
Mr. Speaker, I rise to ask the body to support the governor's veto. Senate Bill 126, as it states in his message to the General Assembly, is because of Senate Bill 126, it is unconstitutional, a power grab by the General Assembly to control the Kentucky judges and the forces in Kentucky to challenge the constitutionality of government acts in places where they do not live and in courts they do not choose. Mr. Speaker, I'd like to also explain the fact of the matter. There's no place in this country, nowhere else in the other 49 states, in which legislation is made in the capital city, and when people disagree with that legislation, they go to the place in which the government is located in their capital city. And the fact of the matter, I think that this is unconstitutional, and I ask you to support the governor's veto of this bill. Thank you.
Chair recognizes the lady from Fayette 75 for discussion of the matter.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. May I speak on the motion to override the veto?
Yes, ma'am.
My concerns that I raised when we first discussed this bill are no different today. Then we must recognize what our role is. Our role is not to infringe upon the judiciary. Our role is not to take away the opportunity of our constituents to bring concerns about the work that we do to the well-qualified judges of Franklin County. The way that this bill is created does not create a judicial system, and instead creates impediments to justice for the people we're serving. They deserve better. We should know better, and I will not override the veto.
Question before the body is final passage of Senate Bill 126, the governor's veto notwithstanding. Is there any further discussion? Seeing none, clerk will sound the chimes. Those in favor vote aye. Those opposed, nay. Roll call is open for your vote. Have all members voted? Does any member wish to change or explain their vote? Clerk will take the roll. Means 78 members voting aye, 19 members voting nay. Senate Bill 126, the governor's veto notwithstanding, is finally passed. Gentleman from McCracken.
Move the clencher.
No objection. Clencher is applied. Gentleman from McCracken.
Mr. Speaker, I move you, sir, the House be in recess till the call of the chair.
Without objection, the House will stand in recess to call the chair.
Just introduce myself and why I wanted to discuss this autism epilepsy combination. I'm a pediatric neurologist. I'm an epileptologist. That's how I came into this field of cannabis, because it's almost inescapable if you're a child neurologist, especially if you really focus on epilepsy. But as Dr. Goldstein mentioned, we're seeing now this growing interest in autism. And it's been growing for some time, but it's almost like Groundhog Day. What I experienced going through epilepsy treatment is now, I'm seeing the same thing develop in my patients with autism, meaning that the moms are coming very motivated, very interested in getting off a lot of the medications that have led to extreme side effects for many of the kids that we see. And when you think of the different things that we're talking about here, all the various conditions, the two big systems that are being highlighted here are brain and the immune system. Both are systems that evolve over a life cycle, so they're very complex in that sense, and there's huge individual variation within both of those two systems. And so any neurologist is going to have to become adept at this area. I think I'll move through these slides pretty quickly because I think this is pretty well known by now, but the latest rates from the CDC are that autism is something that we've seen about 1 in 59 children now. And if you look at the trend, when you go from the year 2000 to 2014, you're going from numbers in 1 in 150 to 1 in 59. This is not going anywhere, and it's a major issue, and it's actually at the point of crisis. It's probably beyond the point of crisis. What I see every day are the kids, when this epidemic really picked up, a lot of those kids are no longer kids, they're now adults, and they're entering a world where there's nobody to care for them. There are no internal medicine docs to care for them, they don't have living situations, they don't have day programs. And the big issues that we're seeing, the one at the very bottom is probably the most important, the aggression. So self-injury or aggression towards others has been a major, major challenge. But we have a host of issues that we face. So common issues include things like anxiety, epilepsy, inflammatory bowel, the PANS and PANDAS world. All these things are big issues. Pain is a really underreported concern. Many of the kids I see have chronic headache, chronic abdominal pain. They're not verbal, so it's hard for them to express that. And that too sometimes comes out through the aggression. But I have to first start by going back to, it was around 2008, and it was a mom who brought this whole idea to me, even before epilepsy really took off. And I have to always credit moms for coming up with all the really good ideas. And all to the moms out there, the dads are kind of like somewhere between a coin flip and a magic 8-ball, I would say. But you ask a mom and they're on the money and they know really what the right direction is, and their gut instinct is something you always have to follow, especially in child neurology. And so it was a mom who came to me, and Marie Lee is an author who came to me with her son. She's written editorials to the Washington Post. She wrote a beautiful 4-part series for Slate magazine, online magazine, regarding her experience using cannabis in her son. And what I want to highlight is that this started, I forget the year, the first one, I think it was like 2008, 2007, 2008. At that time, it was incredibly brave for her to bring this forward. There was real fear that Child Protective would be at her door taking her son away. And you can imagine how that would play out. But thankfully it didn't go that way. And actually what occurred is he went from a child who was having over 300 aggressive episodes per day. His teachers were wearing Taekwondo arm pads just to protect themselves. It was that bad. To basically having multiple days, day after day, with 0 aggressions. And he went to a school where they would actually keep a clicker and count all the aggressive episodes. And the way she described it 2 years in was, she stated, and she was very open about the fact that this is not a cure, but it was a success because now her son, who the most severe symptoms were alleviated, and both her husband, her son could finally, as a family, heal together. And instead of living in a house full of screams and destruction, they could actually be people who are happy as a family unit together. It affected the whole family, and that's an important thing to think about. When you have a child who's going through this, no one in that household is functioning. And so it's an important issue, and I wanted to just highlight it today. Dr. Goldstein mentioned it, but this is really an epidemic right now. This is a serious, serious concern to the families that I see. And I can't see them all because of the number of phone calls that we get and the referrals we get. We just can't keep up. There's been a lot of work to describe the prevalence of aggression in autism, and it's really common. So almost 70% will have behaved aggressively towards caregivers, about 50% towards non-caregivers. You don't see it as commonly in kids who have cognitive impairment from other causes. It's actually fairly uncommon in kids with cognitive impairment from other causes. And the reasons for aggression in autism are very different than in other kids. One thing that it's worth noting, I mean, there have been many trials to go through standard pharmacotherapy for autism and aggression, 46 placebo-controlled trials. Of those, the only 2 FDA-approved products for aggression are both antipsychotics. So it's not, I mean, this is what we have to deal with. So if you kind of play it by the book and you go and you're a child neurologist and you go based on what we have available, I could put you on 1 of 2 antipsychotics. The problem is, one is they don't work well. I'm just speaking from my own experience. Second is that they cause a lot of weight gain. So you just took, and I've had many kids like this. I take a kid who weighs 130 pounds who's aggressive. I just made him weigh 230 pounds and aggressive. And you can see where that leads. So it's a serious issue. Plus you have other things like movement disorders, sedation. It's not easy. I even have some kids that the increased appetite on antipsychotics can be so severe that sometimes that itself is a cause of aggression. The kids are so hungry chronically that the food becomes their trigger. And you can imagine, again, the families are dealing with massive social isolation. I just met up with someone I knew in high school who's been living with this. She hasn't been to a movie in 10 years. She hasn't been out to eat. You can't get babysitters. I mean, it's something you feel like you're trapped sometimes. And one mom mentioned in an article that she describes an unbearable level of exhaustion and almost feeling like she's in jail for life. So obviously we need to help these families. In my own practice, one thing I do note, this is something that's much more common in boys than girls. Autism itself is more common in boys than girls, but the aggression in particular is more common in boys. A lot of these boys had the history where they were developing normally up until about 18 months and then suddenly had a regression of developmental milestones. So it's almost like regression begets aggression. So these are kids who, what happens is they go through like a second regression in their lives. They get a little testosterone around 12 to 14. They start to go through adolescence. And I don't know if testosterone is the issue here, but we're on UCLA campus and we could probably walk by the fraternity row here on a Friday night. And I think we probably could see the effect of testosterone on neurotypical males. And so I don't think it's good for my kids who are nonverbal either, but I think it's a major factor here. Because it's always in adolescence when this develops. And one thing that's interesting, and this is where we're going to go with the autism seizure combination here, is that in kids who have a history of epilepsy, sometimes the aggression kind of precedes it or builds up to it. Think of them both as sort of a hyperexcitable state. Their brain is hyperexcitable and it builds from aggression into epilepsy sometimes. A lot of these kids didn't have epilepsy when they were younger. They develop epilepsy sometimes as teenagers. Of course, the causes, like in all things, are multifactorial here, though. You have a combination of anxiety, OCD, pain syndromes, sensory integration, communication, list goes on. So for each kid, we have to find out what their individual triggers are. And the reason I want to kind of bring up this epilepsy-autism connection is we might, in the end, be treating the same thing here. So we know that cannabidiol works very well for epilepsy. I think what we're looking at in autism may really be dealing with many of the same mechanisms. The rates of epilepsy in kids with autism are very high, and the rates of autism in kids with epilepsy are very high. So, I mean, these two things go together, and don't think of them as comorbid. Think of it more like when you have a cold, you have sniffles, cough, maybe a fever. Those aren't comorbid conditions. Those are all caused by the same cold, right? It's all just different symptoms of the same thing, and that's more the way I'd like to view this. And so when you think of the root causes, and there are many, some disorders might relate to neurotransmitters. An example would be Fragile X, which involves metabotropic glutamate receptor, mGluR5. Some issues might relate to growth factors. An example there would be the mTOR pathway. mTOR is a growth regulation pathway. It's also important for certain types of tumors. And that would include things like tuberous sclerosis or neurofibromatosis. These are all these conditions I'm mentioning can cause both autism and epilepsy together from the same underlying cause. You have channelopathies, Dravet syndrome being a very common one. So that's a sodium channel defect that causes seizures at a very young age and also causes very high rates of autism. And you can have immunologic factors. An example there, an extreme one would be the NMDA receptor antibodies, where antibodies are binding to these excitatory neurotransmitter receptors, and that in turn can cause a whole host of different issues, but in particular seizures. Making it a little more complicated, spike waves on EEG might actually play a direct role in terms of language regression or autism features in kids with epilepsy. So there is an important role here for EEG. EEG's, I mean, I'm an EEGer by trade. EEG doesn't really do a lot, but this is one area where it actually helps. Because for most of us, it's squiggles on a page. But when we look at what we have available now in terms of data for autism, there's still not a lot. This is an area that is going to require a lot of growth, and this will take off the way epilepsy did. I guarantee you that. So you can look at various preclinical models. For Fragile X, it's actually a little bit mixed. You could see improvements with either blockade or enhancement of endocannabinoid signaling. So these are in rat models, so it's hard to know if this translates to humans and which one would translate better. I think it's interesting that oxytocin, which has been long touted as potential treatment for improving aggression in patients with autism, this whole mechanism probably works through the endocannabinoid system, at least in mouse models. So that oxytocin may reinforce, oxytocin itself will reinforce social bonding. We think of this as it's the hormone that gets released when people breastfeed or when you see a cute little puppy. It gives you that warm, fuzzy feeling. And it drives anandamine mobilization. And the nucleus accumbens is part of the brain that's important for motivated behaviors. Things like addiction are actually related to that region. So there may be some link in oxytocin. And in Dravet syndrome, what's really interesting is in mouse models for Dravet, if you improve the seizures, you actually improve the autistic-like behaviors, as autistic as a mouse can be. But mice do show there are ways to grade social interaction of mice. And so with improvement of seizures comes improvement in development. And that would be huge if you could actually improve the seizures and improve the core features of autism, because many of the seizure treatments we have may sedate you, they may drug you, but they're not going to fundamentally improve your social development or your language development. So to have that would be a game changer. We're really limited on clinical studies, but this is where we give a shout out to the nation of Israel for stepping up in this area, because we haven't been able to do these in the US. So I have to acknowledge that. But we had a few case reports, but more recently, coming out of Jerusalem, there is an ongoing prospective study, but this was very exciting when this got published, that looking at a total of 60 patients with autism, most of them were low functioning, not very verbal, mostly boys. And they were treated with, it was a 20-to-1 ratio that they were using. So something similar to what we would do for epilepsy. And the dose went pretty high. So it went up to 10 mg. I don't go that high in my patients. Most of my patients I don't think to go that high, actually. Often they don't tolerate it at lower doses. But the behavioral, what they saw is those behavioral outbreaks of aggression had improved in 61% of patients. Things like anxiety and communication problems also improved in a good percentage. And you can look at the frequency of the actual disrupted behaviors. So these patients, it's not like the disrupted behaviors fully ended, but in the patients who were having them, the frequency per day had dropped. And one thing that was noted is that this is something that was a little bit more evident in boys and a little more evident in kids who didn't fit a specific genetic syndrome. So for most kids with autism, most kids still don't have a known gene, despite the fact that we have very advanced genetic testing these days. Our hit rate is only about 25%. Most kids don't have a known gene or known syndrome, and those were the kids that seemed to respond well. It was noted that there were some sleep disturbances, irritability, loss of appetite. But based on this, the same center is going to launch a prospective double-blind placebo-controlled trial with 120 patients. So that's very exciting. I mean, that's the direction we need to go.
3 minutes.
In my own observation, I have much smaller numbers, admittedly, but what I could say from what I've seen in about, I have about 200 patients with autism and aggression that I follow. Again, I'm an epileptologist, but so most of my practice is epilepsy, but about only about a tenth of my patients have moved towards cannabis-based therapy. But of those 24, and I have a little bit of a higher percentage of girls who've gone towards cannabis-based therapy. But what we've seen is the epilepsy, in those who've had epilepsy, I've seen a very high rate of improvement, so which is great. So of those 24, 17 had epilepsy, 14 of which saw improvement there. And we saw similar improvements in those patients of the 24 who had aggression as the primary symptom. So keep in mind, aggression is not the only symptom that patients are treating. Sometimes they're treating inflammation, they could be treating abdominal pain or GI symptoms. So there are other reasons they might pursue this, but of those where aggression was the primary thing, for those individuals, particularly the non-syndromic boys, about 10 out of 13 from my own practice saw improvement. And of those kids who had a regression, we saw, I'm seeing improvement in about 11 out of 13. So it seems to me if you had to pick the patients that you want to consider this in, typical patient that I think was going to respond well, those who have epilepsy, but the story would kind of follow like this. It's a child who's developing about 8 months, had a period of regression, and then now sometime between about 12 to 14 years of age is suddenly having an increase in aggressive behaviors. And then somewhere around that same time, they're developing epilepsy. And that's a pretty good patient to consider this as a therapy. The one thing to counsel patients on, though, this is not a cure, and they're going to continue to have aggressive episodes, but this will be just one extra tool in your toolbox
1 minute.
to help things. And the other thing to note, too, is that what was done in Jerusalem is different from what I'm using or what I'm seeing because their dosing was higher, but the ratio is also different. What I generally find is that patients need ratios. When you look at CBD to THC, I think they're doing better when you're getting into like a 5-to-1 or 3-to-1 kind of ratio than that 20-to-1 ratio. But no two kids are the same, so I really can't make any broad assessment. This is a little more, I think Dr. Goldstein emphasized as well, there's a lot of art in this, and you have to really listen to the feedback that you're getting. And if we look at setting up future studies, we have to acknowledge that there's a lot of heterogeneity within our patients. So we have to look at a lot of various factors to decide what's the right therapy. And we have to, again, think of what are the specific indications that these patients need help with. The most important thing is our kids need help, and the parents are super motivated. They want to get their kids better. If we could set up trials, you'll recruit like nobody's business. And this is my group at the Floating Hospital.
We're out of
Thank you.
time. Thank you very much. Let's hear it for Dr.
Thank you. Thank you very much. And well, I'm going to use my 15 minutes wisely at the CV part, and I'm going to go straight to the data. I'm going to present the most recent research we have done in the lab on the anti-tumor effects of cannabinoids. And we have been doing this for 20 years already, and it's pretty clear to us, not only from the research that we have done in our lab, but from the research that other groups all over the world have been doing during this time, that cannabinoids have anti-tumor properties. And they can produce these effects by targeting different stages of the disease. They can kill cancer cells, as it was mentioned before. They can also block the feeding of the new tumoral masses, the process that we call angiogenesis, and they can also block the generation of metastases. But the truth is that the vast majority of these studies have been conducted with pure cannabinoids, not because we think this is the best therapeutic approach, but because we wanted to understand what was going on inside the cancer cells to understand how cannabinoids work. So Uh, it is pretty obvious also, and I don't think I have to give you any extra explanation today, that the cannabis plant is a very complex and sophisticated factory, and it produces not only THC and CBD, but a lot of other cannabinoids and a lot of other chemical compounds that have a very interesting therapeutic potential. For example, among the cannabinoids, there are more than 140 different entities, and some of them have very interesting potential therapeutic applications. Sorry, some have antiproliferative actions in cancer cells grown in cultures. And the key issue here is that most of them have not been studied yet. And the same thing happens with terpenes. We know that some of them have interesting therapeutic applications, and I highly recommend you to read the work that Ethan Russo has published in these regards. And again, most of these compounds, and we are talking about more than 100 compounds, way more than 100 compounds, have not been studied yet. And as Didi mentioned before, when we talk about cannabis and about other plants, but cannabis in particular, we have to keep in mind what we call in pharmacology the synergistic effect, or what we call in this auditorium the entourage effect, which means that 1 + 1 is way more than 2. So with all these things in mind, the question we tried to address in this specific project was if it was a better therapeutic approach to use pure cannabinoids, THC, CBD, or whole plant preparations. And to answer this question, we established a collaboration with this company here, Cell Therapeutics, based in Australia. And we aimed at comparing the anti-tumor effect of pure THC provided by THC Farm with that of a THC-rich extract provided by OnCeldas, a nonprofit mutual benefit corporation based in California. So we have the analysis of a number of cannabinoids, not all of them, but a number of cannabinoids in the preparation, a number of terpenes in the preparation. And because we wanted to be sure that we were comparing the same amount of THC in here and in here, we did not one lab test, but 3 in different facilities, 1 in the United States and 2 in Spain, and to corroborate this information, this data. So we did these experiments in different models of breast cancer. My group is working on breast cancer now. And regarding this pathology, we use the same term, breast cancer, to define pathologies that have nothing to do with one to each other in terms of molecular markers, treatments, prognosis, etc. So when doctors have to choose a specific treatment for a breast cancer patient, they check for specific markers. And depending on these markers, they subclassify breast cancer in 3 subtypes. The first one is called hormone sensitive because these cancer cells express estrogen receptors or progesterone receptors. And since the estrogenic signaling is exacerbated, the aim of these therapies is to shut down this signaling. And we can do that by different approaches. We can remove the endogenous source of estrogens by removing the ovaries, or we can use drugs to interfere with this signaling. And one of them, for example, is, I'm sure you have heard about it, is tamoxifen. The second type of breast tumors is called HER2 positive because these cancer cells express abnormally high levels of this protein called HER2. What do the doctors recommend to these patients? Well, drugs that specifically target this protein, this HER2 receptor. Trastuzumab, pertuzumab, the names are irrelevant at this point. And there is a third entity, which is called triple negative, and the name is self-explanatory. It's called triple negative because these cancer cells do not express estrogen receptors or progesterone receptors or HER2 receptors. And unfortunately, this is the most aggressive phenotype. And unfortunately, since there are no specific markers, there are no specific drugs that we can use for these patients. And they have to receive standard chemotherapy that you all know that is extremely aggressive. Well, we tried to answer the question I mentioned before in the different subtypes of breast cancer. And we started with the hormone sensitive. And what we did was to grow these cancer cells, a cell line that is called T47D in these petri dishes that Didi showed you. And we challenged these cells with increasing concentrations of THC. THC that came either from THC farm, in other words, pure THC, or from the botanical drug extract, from the whole plant extract. And as you can see, and here what we represent is cell viability, is the percentage of cells that remain alive in the cell cultures. And as you can see, as we increase THC concentration, these dots go down. In other words, we are killing the cancer cells. And as you can also see very easily in this graph, the pure THC produces this anti-tumoral action, but the extract is more potent than the pure cannabinoid. In order to see if this was an effect that was exclusively produced in this cell line, or it was more general and of hormone-sensitive breast cancer cells in general, we performed the same experiment in a second hormone-sensitive breast cancer cell line, MCF7, and the effect was exactly the same. Both poor THC and the extract decreased the viability of these cancer cells, and again, the extract was more potent than the pure compound. We then moved to the second subtype of breast cancer, HER2 positive, and performed exactly the same experiments. And the response was exactly the same. Both THC and the extract decreased the viability of these cancer cells in culture. And again, the extract, the purple line, was more potent in doing that than the pure cannabinoid. And finally, we did these experiments in the triple negative breast cancer cells. And I want to remind you that this is a very aggressive subtype of breast cancer with no targeted therapies yet. And we observed that these cancer cells are also sensitive to cannabinoid treatment. Both the pure compound in green and the extract in purple decrease the viability of the two cell lines of this subtype that we studied. And again, the botanical drug extract was more potent than the pure compound. So from this part, the take-home message is that all breast cancer subtypes are sensitive to cannabinoid antiproliferative action, and that the extract is more potent than the pure compound. So we next tried to do something similar to what Didi is doing. We tried to combine pure THC with the most prominent, most abundant terpenes in the extract, just to see if we could recreate the effect of the whole plant extract, whole plant preparation, by combining THC with a bunch of other compounds. And we did that in the three subtypes of breast cancer, and I'm going to guide you through the graphs. We represent here again cell viability in percentage. So this is the amount of cells that remain alive, again, in the dishes. And we want these bars to go as down as possible. And in the white bars, you have the control cells, the cells that do not receive any kind of treatment. And in this line bar, what you see is the effect that the terpenes, only the 5 terpenes produce on cell viability, which is none. Just using the 5 terpenes, you do not decrease the viability, you do not kill the cancer cells. What happens if we combine THC with this terpene cocktail? Well, the effect is this one. And if you compare this bar with this one, which is the effect that the THC alone produces, it's very easy to see that combining THC with the terpene cocktail does not increase the anti-cancer effect of a pure compound. We obtain exactly the same effects in the other two subtypes. This is the effect of the terpenes alone in these two cell lines. This is the effect of THC in the HER2 positive. This is the effect of the THC in the triple negative. And when we add the terpenes to the THC, we cannot improve the anti-tumor effect of the THC. So combination of THC with these 5 specific terpenes does not recreate the effect of or the potency of THC. So what about in vivo effect? Because a lot of things work in vitro, and we can draw some conclusions from in vitro studies. But if we really want to sell an anti-tumor tool, we have to prove that it works in more physiological settings. So what happens if we reproduce these effects in animal models of cancer? And what happens if we combine these cannabinoids with the standard therapies that these patients receive? Well, to answer this question, we conducted a series of experiments in animal models of the 3 different subtypes of cancer. And we started with the hormone-sensitive ones. And first of all, we started with in vitro studies to analyze the combination of tamoxifen. This is the drug we used for these studies. So we studied what happened when combining tamoxifen and cannabinoids in vitro. And as you can see here, this is the effect that tamoxifen alone produces. This is the effect that THC alone produces. This is a very low concentration of THC. And when we combine THC and tamoxifen, we see a synergistic response. And exactly the same thing happens when we use not pure THC, but the botanical drug preparation. What happens if we move to the in vivo? We will observe the same thing. Well, in this case, what we represent is tumor volume, the size of the tumors versus time. And these white dots represent how these tumors grow when the animals receive no treatment. So the tumoral masses grow with no control. This is the green line is the effect that THC alone produces. And the purple line, again, is the effect that the botanical drug preparation produces. And I think it's pretty obvious to see that it's more potent than the pure compound. And not only that, but if we compare the effect of the botanical drug preparation with that of tamoxifen, which is the current treatment that patients with this type of tumors receive, you can see that the potency is exactly the same one. We also combined tamoxifen with the botanical drug preparation, and we didn't see a big increase in the antitumoral properties of the preparation. We performed similar experiments in HER2-positive models of breast cancer, and in this case, we selected lapatinib, one of the drugs that specifically target this receptor, and we obtained very, very similar results. In vitro, when combining lapatinib, this drug, with pure THC, we observed synergistic responses, something very similar with the botanical drug preparation, and exactly the same as we observed before in the in vivo setting. The white line, again, is the control animals. If we treat the animals with pure THC, we get a modest antitumoral response. But if we use the whole plant preparation, the antitumor effect is much, much higher, much bigger. And if we compare the antitumoral potency of the whole plant extract with that of lapatinib, again, we see that we have a tool that is as potent as the current medicine that these patients receive. And what about the triple negative? And I remind you again, the most aggressive type of breast cancer that a woman can have. Well, we observed exactly the same thing. When we combine, in this case, we used a chemotherapy agent, cisplatin, and this is the effect that cisplatin produces alone. This is the effect that THC produces. And when we move to the in vivo, again, this is THC, this is the botanical drug preparation, and as you can see, it's more potent than in the pure compound. I'm going to skip the rest of the lines because I don't have time. And the take-home message from this part is that the THC-rich extract is more potent than pure THC, both in vitro and in vivo. That the THC-rich extract is as potent as the standard therapies that we tested, that are the standard treatments that these patients are receiving. And unfortunately, the combination of cannabinoids with the tested anti-cancer treatments didn't improve the potency of either one of them. I don't have time to discuss why we think this is going on, but that's what we observed. And as a conclusion, we have more than enough evidence that cannabinoids are effective anti-tumor tools in preclinical models of cancer. All breast cancer subtypes respond to cannabinoids. Whole plant preparations are more potent than pure cannabinoids, and whole plant extracts are as potent as current therapies. I don't want you to go home with the conclusion that the extract we used in this paper is the extract you have to give to your patients. The only point we wanted to make is that it's better to use whole plant preparations than pure compounds. And I want to finish by thanking the people that did the work. I'm just here presenting it, but these are the guys that did it. And here is my small team. And I want to thank, of course, the team of Aunt Zeldas that was absolutely necessary for the performance of these experiments. Thank you very much.
You have time for one question if you like. You have 1 minute left.
Christina, very nice.
Thank you.
There were small amounts of cannabigerol and tetrahydrocannabinolic acid. Have you had the chance to test those to see if they were the ones that made the difference?
Yeah, that's an excellent question. Yeah, I didn't point it to in the slide, but the extract had a little bit of CBG and a little bit of another cannabinoid, THCA. And we did check if CBG, combining THC and CBG, we could reproduce the effects, and we were not able to. We haven't done the experiments with THCA, but that's something we want to do, of course. Yeah, very good question. Thank you.
Cannabis may be effective both for treating diabetes as well as for treating the symptomatic expression of diabetes. This is perhaps one of the newest areas of cannabis research, and we are seeing promising animal model data that indicates that CBD could be effective at actually treating diabetes itself. On the ground, from an anecdotal perspective, we do already have experience with patients that get benefits from treating the symptomatic expression of their diabetes with a wide variety of types of cannabis. For some patients, that may mean consuming THC to get better sleep. For others, that may mean consuming CBD-rich medications to reduce inflammation and increase their mobility. But what's most promising is international data that's indicating that CBD may, in fact, have an effect on the onset of this disease in the first place. That's what I'm most hopeful about, and I certainly think we should push as a nation to get more research in this category. Well, I think the amount of data and even anecdotal experience we have with regards to diabetes and cannabis is pretty minimal. What seems most promising are CBD-rich medications and their ability to regulate insulin production. I would recommend to diabetic patients who are considering CBD as an option to consider dosing 2 to 3 times a day at a minimum over a long span of time, at least 2 to 3 weeks, to get a lens on how that may in fact be affecting your diabetes and insulin production. Diabetic patients experience a great deal of different symptomatic expression of their ailment. And I think it depends what that symptomatic expression is, in turn with what medications would be most effective. Some people experience pain as a very significant part of their diabetes. And in that case, I highly suggest an even balance of CBD to THC, as it often proves to be the strongest analgesic for the largest number of patients. If a patient has difficulty with sleep, then they may want to consider more THC or in fact CBN as an option for their sleep needs in relation to their diabetes. Patients may experience benefits from cannabis both immediately and in the long run, depending on what type of medications they're taking and what effects they're seeking. Pain reduction, sleep needs are certainly those categories where you may get immediate benefits, whereas inflammation would be a category that you're more likely to see benefits in the longer run.
So you want to make sure that when you're working with somebody and figuring out what to use to treat the diabetes, that you also take a look at your nutrition as well. I know I often am asked, well, why can't I just use cannabis? Why don't I say, well, we have a lot of people out there using a lot of pharmaceuticals that are all still very, very sick, because you have to treat the whole person. And with diabetes, this is actually even more so the case because of the nutritional aspects to this. We have an obesity epidemic in this country, and it's actually spreading all over the world now. And the cannabis, the use of CBD and THCV, which is the THC with the virin, it's just a slight variance on what we do. You still have paranoid. People find it's much more comfortable. We have a lot more work to do on making products available that have these components, or at least that have the THCV component. But I'm very excited about the promise of this particular molecule moving forward, especially in the treatment of diabetes. Is it going to cure diabetes? Absolutely not. Absolutely not. Having said that, though, if you have type 2 diabetes as the result of obesity, and you're able to get your weight down and your nutrition in check, it may be that you're able to get off of your insulin, get off of some of the other things that you're having, and save your health. But this is up to you and your doctor to monitor this very, very closely. And I would recommend that you do not do something like this on your own, that you have guidance and you have professional oversight when you're treating yourself. And certainly don't go off any insulin or anything like that without a medical professional overseeing your treatment.
With this new field of research with regards to diabetes and cannabis, it makes it all the more crucial for patients to take notes, take time, and really devote themselves to understanding the medications they're engaged with and what benefits they're experiencing from them, to really dial in to what might be the best options for them individually.
Ready.
The following video was captured over the course of 12 months. 485,000 individual photos combined for a single video. What's Percolating presents Bloom. What you are looking at is hundreds of thousands of photos. Each photo is taken moments apart, capturing footage our eyes had once not seen. The pictures are saved and stored away to be later processed into a video. Individually, these photos don't seem much. But when you combine them together, something magical happens. The life of a seed begins below the surface. When conditions are warm and wet enough, it gives birth to our new generation of seeds. However, they are not the only ones living here. What you are seeing moving around in the soil is called Stratiolaelaps scimatus, also known as hypospace miles. These little critters work in a symbiotic relationship with the seeds, fighting off prey and ensuring the survival of the plant. At this stage, the taproot will anchor itself and prepare for a new life. The seedling has breached the surface. A monumental step, but our journey has just begun. The dance of the plants.
This video is sponsored by Filmstro. Filmstro is an app that lets you be in charge of your music. Pick a song from the huge library of royalty-free music and edit to your video style. Filmstro is giving my viewers 15% off annual subscriptions. Just type in what's percolating when you're checking out. Before we get back to the video, I just want to say 99% of you who watched my video were not subscribed. So please, make sure you click it this time.
Naturally, plants begin blooming as the daylight hours decrease. But since we are indoors in an artificial environment, we achieve these results by mimicking nature. This entire journey and all the conditions that were just right have manifested and brought us here to the blooming phase. The lights will turn on and off every 12 hours, as they do at the end of the solstice. This signals to the plant it is time to blossom. You can see the change between both the blue. The camera was prepped for this. She ended up out canopy. Rather, she begins putting her energy into her new colas. What you're having is the development of the female's reproductive organ along with the colas. The main reproductive organ for a female plant is the pistil, which is located below each cola. You can see two hair-like strands called stigmas coming out of each pistil. The coloration of these stigmas begin white and over time darken to an amber color as the plant matures. Eventually, the plant has stopped its production of leaves and has fully devoted itself to blossoming. As the colas swell, you can see the trichomes taking shape on the leaves. During this period, most cultivators will remove the leaves for the purpose of maintaining a healthy plant. But for the sake of the time-lapse, the foliage will be left untouched. To the naked eye, she is frozen in time, or so it seems. The race is back on. Given these plants are grown in an artificial environment, they won't face struggles of the jungle. If these plants were in the wild, it would night. Temperature, humidity. Blocks fuller. Magnificent. A transformation unseen. Colas begin to swell as the days pass by. The development of these colas vary from each strain. Strains can differ in size, color, and even smell. Despite many differences, one characteristic they all share is the development of trichomes. In the early stages, when trichomes just form, they start off clear in color before becoming opaque and eventually turning amber. This change in color is shared amongst all strains and tells us when our fruit is ready for harvesting. As the plant uses its final bit of energy, the leaves begin to curl as the nutrition is depleted. What started off as a seed has reached its final stage of the metamorphism. The plant has reached full maturity and is ready to be carefully harvested. Thanks for watching. Subscribe. Seriously, this cost a lot of money. The following video was captured over the course of 12 months. 485,000 individual photos combined for a single video. What's Percolating presents Bloom. What you are looking at is hundreds of thousands of photos. Each photo is taken during foot and the picture stays stored there to be later. Usually, these photos don't seem much. But when you combine them together, something magical happens. The life of a seed begins below the surface. When conditions are warm and wet enough, it gives birth to our new generation of seeds. However, they are not the only ones living here. What's seeing around in the soil? Skimmers also smile the survival plant. This stage will anchor it and prepare. Dance of the plants.
This video is sponsored by Filmstro. Filmstro is an app that lets you be in charge of your music. Pick a song from the huge library of royalties.
What you are observing is the development of the female's reproductive organs, along with the colas. The main reproductive organ for a female plant is the pistil, which is located below each cola. You can see two hair-like strands called stigmas coming out of each pistil. The coloration of these stigmas begin white and over time darken to an amber color as the plant matures. Eventually, the plant has stopped its production of leaves and has fully devoted itself to blossoming. As the colas swell, you can see the trichomes taking shape on the leaves. During this period, most cultivators will remove the leaves for the purpose of maintaining a healthy plant. But for the sake of the time-lapse, the foliage will be left untouched. To the naked eye, she is frozen in time. Or so it seems. The race is back on. Given these plants are grown in an artificial environment, they won't face the struggles of the jungle. If these plants were in the wild, it would be a battle for sunlight. Instead, we are indoors where we can manipulate the environment and control things like the lighting, temperature, and even the humidity. Doing so allows the plants to blossom to its full potential. Magnificent. The leaves continue their dance to each rising of the sun, almost as if they were orchestrated to do so. During the final weeks, the plant undergoes a transformation unseen. Colas begin to swell as the days pass by. The development of these colas vary from each strain. Color and despite differences, one characteristic they all share is the development of trichomes. In the early stages, when trichomes just form, they start off clear in color before becoming opaque and eventually turning amber. This change in color is shared amongst all strains and tells us when our fruit is ready for harvesting. As the plant uses its final bit of energy, the leaves begin to curl as the nutrition is depleted. What started off as a seed has reached its final stage of the metamorphism. The plant has reached full maturity and is ready to be carefully harvested. Thanks for watching. Subscribe. Seriously, this cost a lot of money.
Coming up on the Cannabis podcast.
Nothing like cannabis. Cannabis is leading the way in technology.
The place where you first look to make the biggest impact is where your biggest consumers are. And we recognized, and the business case was showing, it's like, well, geez, I mean, we could be saving growers $10,000, $15,000 a month.
And so if you're going with an LED, you can get excellent incentive depending on the cost of the LED, maybe 60 to 90% of the LED. Sometimes they offer bonuses where you can even get 100%.
Dude, anytime they can give you $200 or $300 off a light to save on the cost, bro, it's a no-brainer, man. It's free. Yeah. It's free money.
Hey, I'm Nick, creator of Cannabis and Growers Network, where we have educated millions of people on how to elevate their craft. I have toured some of the largest grow operations, befriended the best growers, and built a network of the top cannabis companies. Join me on this next adventure where I document history with the pioneers shaping the global cannabis industry in real time. Welcome to the Cannabis podcast. Hey, thanks for watching. Do you want your own episode of Canna Cribs? What about up to 20